Welcome to the second speaker event of the 2017-2018 school year. This is an ethics and governance speaker series event and sponsored by the Center for Ethics in Business and Governance. The Ethics and Governance Initiative is funded by a grant from the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office to promote ethical thinking and corporate citizenship in the state. So today's event really is a perfect one in line with that initiative. In recent years, we've heard much talk about corporate social responsibility. The idea that corporations have responsibilities to society or the environment beyond simply making a profit. Many companies have therefore explicitly incorporated social or environmental responsibility into their values and mission. Yet we all know that no matter how high-minded the company, profitability is essential. Thus the mantra, no margin, no mission. So how do companies negotiate the tension between values and profit? Is there inevitably a tension? Or can a company's value and mission help drive profitability? These are just some of the questions that I think the panelists will be answering today. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's panelists to you. You've got a program in front of you, so you can read more about them. I won't repeat much of what's there. But first of all, I'll start in the middle. Ms. Lisa Drake serves as Director of Sustainability Innovation at Stonyfield, company I'm sure familiar to most of us. Hope you had some yogurt over there. She serves on various boards, including the Board of New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. On her left is Mr. Mark Buckley. He's worked at Staples for 27 years, where he currently serves as VP for Sustainability. You'll notice the theme. He also serves on many environmental and nonprofit boards, and most importantly, he was a graduate, or is a graduate, of St. Anselm College, biology major, I believe. So moderating today's event is Professor Dina Frutos-Bencze in the Economics and Business Department. She has various interests in international business, including international business and its impact on environmental sustainability. So she'll interview our panelists, and then she'll save plenty of time to moderate questions from the audience. So I encourage you to bring your questions. This is designed to be a communal discussion. So I believe there'll be a couple microphones. A couple of students will walk around with microphones. So when it comes time to audience questions, you can just raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. So please welcome me in, please join me in welcoming today's panelists.
Good morning. I think this is on. I believe so. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I share with Kyle, the welcoming remarks. So the format we'd like to have is that we have a set of questions. I have a set of questions, and so we'll proceed with that first, and then we'll open it up for the rest. So kind of along with the topic, obviously, of the mission and the values of the company and the mission, I'd like each of you to tell us a little bit more about the mission, vision, values of your company. And the first question is like, how does a company implement that vision and mission and vision, in corporate decision making? Because, the focus is sustainability, but I want to know kind of on the whole, how you deal with that tension, as Kyle mentioned. So maybe Lisa first.
Sure. So Stonyfield is a 34-year-old company. It was founded in Wilton, New Hampshire on a farm. And it was originally an organic farming school, a nonprofit organization that was looking to educate people about the value of family farms in New England and about sustainable farming methods. And As a bit of a struggling nonprofit, they started selling yogurt, and the rest is the Stonyfield history. And so we have been founded with the values in mind from the very beginning, and have had very strong leadership in Gary Hirschberg, our founder, to continue to be a business that is not just after the dollar, but is tied back to the roots of the company, and to be living the mission of educating people about the value of family farms, about supporting family farms and sustainable agriculture, and to use the business as a way to get those messages out into the world and to do good in the world. So in a sense, it's being a values-led business is so ingrained in who we are that to some extent it comes naturally.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, that doesn't mean it's not always easy, and that the things do challenge us, and you have to continue to be vigilant around reminding yourself who you are and what you're trying to accomplish in the world. And so to get to the question around corporate decision making, I think it's we have a mission. It's written as we are looking to be serving healthy food, supporting healthy people, a healthy planet, and to have a healthy business. And so we call it our 4 healthies. And so that's sort of our guiding light. And to have that alignment in the company, to be able to always point back to these are the things we're trying to accomplish, it keeps us in balance. And but you can't just take a mission statement and frame it and hang it on the wall and expect that that's going to deliver the results. It is how you live it, and it is how the leaders in the company show it day in and day out, that this is who we are and this is how we care about, and that this is how we're going to go about making our decisions and setting our processes such that we can continue to grow in all of those areas.
Yeah, I guess the implementation part, right? Living the vision and mission through implementation. Yes. Mark, what about
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Staples?
It's great to be back, by the way. Things have changed since the late 70s. All for the better, by the way. So Staples is a relatively young company also. We're only 31 years old. We opened our first location in Brighton, Massachusetts on Soldiers Field Road, if those of you are familiar with Boston. Our founder was a gentleman named Tom Stenberg. He came out of the grocery business. And when I started, we had, I think, maybe 30 stores here in the Northeast. At the height of our growth, we were in 27 countries. We had about 2,500 stores, domestically and internationally. And our businesses changed pretty dramatically. Our business-to-business business is actually the bigger part of our business today. A little bit different story than the one that Lisa shared with you. I think that our leadership, including Tom, are very ethical in terms of their approach to business, but very conservative. So more of a traditional kind of a business. Didn't come from an organic. Didn't have an organic nonprofit as sort of the founding principles. In terms of a formalized corporate social responsibility, I guess, position that Staples had, it actually was the result of an environmental campaign against Staples back in 2000 and 2001 by 2 environmental groups. One was an organization called Forest Ethics out of San Francisco, California, and then Dogwood Alliance out of Asheville, North Carolina. And they started to picket our stores, and they were chaining themselves to the store doors, and they had placards out there, and they had a campaign outside Fenway Park and a whole bunch of other things. And I think initially we weren't quite sure what our leadership wasn't quite sure why they had picketed us. And it had to do with our paper procurement policies, or lack thereof, because nobody had any at that point in time. And Tom Stenberg, our founder, and Ron Sargent, our former CEO, to their credit, took a step back and said, as a responsible global company, A, is there more that we can do, and B, is there more that we should be doing, and what is it, right? And so that kind of launched us on this learning journey to figure out, what what our impacts were relative to our business and how we could use our spheres of influence beyond the four walls of our operations to actually create change. And the one thing that I would say is that businesses struggle with this all the time, and it's not necessarily a struggle. I mean, the ethics piece is easy overall. You do what's right, and I think that's something that's been ingrained well, right from the founding of the company. In terms of what your sphere of influence is and what your responsibility outside of the four walls of your operation is something very, very different. So what's interesting is that this learning journey has kind of created an opportunity for us to continue to challenge ourselves, to benchmark our performance, and then to commit ourselves to continuous improvement and be radically transparent with stakeholders and engage stakeholders at every level. So that's a very different sort of position than we took probably in 1986, and I think it's one that I don't ever envision us changing. I envision it continuing to be part of the ethos of the company and part of who we are. But there's no company out there that's perfect, and by the way, a sustainable company is not a plateau, it's not a place that you land, it's really a culture that you build, and I think that's what we continue to do, is build that culture.
Thank you. We usually in class, we talk about how important the vision and the mission and all these statements are. Have your company, I don't know about yours, but at least Staples, with those events that you described, had to adjust it or kind of rework the mission in terms of, as you said, there's a statement, but then how you implement it and how that mission or vision or even the values morph to some extent. Has that transformation taken place at Staples, and how has that process been?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty fortunate in that I was a biology major. I ended up in business. I wasn't going to wear a tie ever. I was never going to work for a corporation. I was going to be a marine biologist. And see how this has all worked out? This has worked out well, right? But what was really pretty interesting is that I actually was the vice president of facilities and procurement. That was my job initially, and it was a small job. I was a one-person operation when the company was in its early days, and then by the time I left to move into this position, I think I had 40 people and I had about $500 million worth of responsibility with the team globally. And when the campaign happened, I saw it as an opportunity to kind of raise my hand and say, I'm interested in this job. I mean, I have a personal passion for this, and it allowed me to take my great, education here at St. Anselm and the biology and my passion for biology, and actually incorporate it into something that I think is really meaningful at a time when I thought it would make a difference. And so for me, it was a transformational moment for me, but also I think one for the company. And this position wouldn't have been created, quite candidly, or it might not have been created as soon had it not been for a campaign. So, so for us, I think that was a watershed moment for us. And then I think initially the early days of being transparent as a business were something that was, a little bit scary for us. I mean, we had been the subject of a campaign, and now we were going to come out and talk about all of our environmental impacts and report on them publicly. And so there were people internally that were like, well, what if we don't hit a target? We're going to get another campaign, and very, very skittish. And then once people understood that we could be radically transparent and start to create dialogue with groups that disagreed with us, and basically, have two-way conversation, that fundamentally changed the dynamic overall. And that really has been extremely helpful in terms of accelerating our thought process within the organization and sort of the impacts that we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Lisa, I mean, you mentioned the history of Stonyfield was very anchored in certain values and mission. Have you seen also kind of the pressure for maybe reevaluating that mission or vision through, kind of my next question is leading to the impact of investors, right? And how that, your vision attracts customers and also investors. So along those lines, kind of picking up on that, the transformation of the company and, the interaction with customers and with investors. If you can elaborate on that, and we'll go to Mark.
It is, quite a journey to go from starting a yogurt business in a farmhouse to being the largest organic yogurt company in
Right.
the country. And so naturally, there's challenges to how do you live through growth and continue to live your mission. And on top of that, we had investment by a parent company in 2001. Eventually became a wholly owned subsidiary of a global dairy company, Danone, and have since this year been sold. So that's a whole other new piece of the story. But so it's growth can be challenging, and I think that the depth of our mission and our values has helped us grow in the right direction, and also aligning with good partners. Gary Hirshberg chose Danone as an investor in Stonyfield because they were also a very purpose-driven company and very conscious of their role of nourishing people around the world. And so, no company is perfect. It was a good alignment. And so with growth, there's the challenges of growing fast and having to make quick decisions and having to find capacity quickly and whatnot. But it's also resources and leverage and things that come with growth as well. So it can enable us to take our mission and to go much further than we could go on our own. So that's been a lot about our transformation of through organic growth and through partnerships with parent companies now, how we continue to mature in a more competitive marketplace.
And I'll come back to you, but going kind of with your story, because yes, it was reported in June that Lactalis, Danone sold the Stonyfield portion to Lactalis, another family-owned French company. Is that the case?
So two of the world leading dairy companies, both French, so you'd think there would be a lot of commonalities, but actually one is a public company, one is a private company, and their personalities and their cultures are quite different. And so we're really in the learning phases. We were just acquired by Lactalis August 1st, so it's still fairly fresh and new, but it is a new set of circumstances. But I think part of what was validating in that process for us is that Lactalis and the other competitors in the acquisition process were interested in Stonyfield for who we are, and and that starts at the core of our mission and our values, and how that has developed into our brand and our reputation in the marketplace and the loyalty that we have with consumers. And so Lactalis paid quite a nice price for Stonyfield, and some would wonder why you would pay so much, but I think it was really the trust in the brand and the reputation and the opportunity that we continue to have to grow in the marketplace, founded in authentic roots.
Thank you. So again, with the investors or private versus public, I guess we could pick that up and continue with Staples. That relationship. I mean, you're also a private company.
Now we are, yeah.
But it's been reported also you have maybe a company trying to invest or acquire pieces. So what is the tension, or how do you see that working again tied to the mission and the vision of the company?
I mean, I think one of the interesting things about sustainability or corporate responsibility in general is that there's been this evolution of thought, I think, in corporations, right? So if you talk 15 or 20 years ago, let's talk about just environmental sustainability for a minute. It was really driven by regulation, right? And when you think about it, regulation is really the bare minimum. It basically keeps the CEO and the board of directors out of jail, right? So I mean, that's what all companies should be doing. That should be your license to operate, even before that. But then what happened is that we started to move along this continuum and started to create transparency around what we were doing and the impacts that we had, and you started to create these reports and so forth. But still, it was off to the side of the business. And I think what we're seeing now in the last 10 years is that corporations understand that you need to actually build these values into the core principles of who you are, and what your brand stands for, why people want to work for you. Okay, you can't expect people to come to work, or you shouldn't expect people to come to work and just take their purpose and their values and put them at the side of the door when they walk in. If you do, then that's an untapped potential to really bring more value to your organization and your brand. So what we've tried to do is kind of flip that. And regardless of your ownership, people are people. You know, they come to work with the head and with a heart, right? And so they have to think about, well, what does that mean to the work that I do every day? So what we try to do is we try to think about this in the context of, yeah, there's the wonky part of sustainability that's very metrics driven, but then there's the storytelling, and there's the examples of why this is important to our business, and why our customers care about this, and why it's important to the profitability of our business long term. So when we talk about sustainability, it's got to be, as Lisa said before, it's not just, you know, environmental sustainability or social sustainability. You know, it's also economic sustainability. You know, we heard, you know, without margin, or without, you know, there's no mission. You know, and I think, you know, that's true. You know, we can't do the work that we want to do if we're not a viable company, we're not profitable. So so I think teaching people, you know, how that all fits together is really important. And we had this conversation earlier. You know, I think when I took the job 15 years ago, I mean, I was kind of a zealot. You know, I said, hey, I'm really excited about this job. Everybody else is gonna feel the same way that I do. And the reality is they don't. Everybody comes at this from a different perspective. So the one thing I've learned in the last 15 years is to try and meet people where they are, you know, and have that conversation to kind of move them up their own continuum. It might be here, you might start here, and it's a stepwise approach. But ultimately, across a large corporation, if you can do that, you know, effectively, then what you do is you create that culture shift, and it really doesn't matter who owns you, and it doesn't matter who invests in you anymore. It just becomes part of, you know, the ethos of the company. I think that's important.
Thank you. And I think I have now sort of the last question before we open it up to the audience, and that is related to, I guess in business we call them like voluntary mechanisms of self-regulation. And that's a long word to just say, you know, there are things like the B Corp certification or filing reports with the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, which these are NGOs that are attempting to provide that transparency, and basically, you know, again, they're voluntary mechanisms because you just said there's no direct regulation for these types of, you know, initiatives for companies. So I'm not sure if you're familiar or you know about B Corps or GRE, so if maybe you can talk a little bit about that. You've been from December, right? 2016, you are a B Corp certified, and Staples has been filing the GRI reports for a while, or since 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
Earlier.
So a little bit more of these, I guess, mechanisms and that you choose, because nobody's forcing you, that the company chooses to participate in or comply with. How does that affect, again, mission, and in a way your relationship with investors and consumers?
So I'll talk about benefit corporation
Sure.
and B Corp certification for a moment. So there's been a movement around benefit corporations. So in a number of states now, there's legislation where a company can incorporate as a benefit corporation, which just means that they have other duties to the community other than just their dollars or bottom line. That means that there's a benefit in what they do to the world. And so there is an organization called B Lab, which certifies businesses under a series of workplace practices, community practices. What are the other ones? There's
I
four
think
of
there
them,
was
sort of
environment,
of
governance,
the business and
employee, workforce.
Yeah, and so there's a series, hundreds of questions that you have to go through if you want to get the certification, but it's really looking at how, not just, we have certifications for our product, that our product is certified organic, and our product, it maybe is certified humane, and it could be fair trade, or it could be, all sorts of these certifications of the product. And in this case, it's certification of the whole company and our practices and our governance and how we run our business and how we engage with the world. And so this has been, in place over the last 5 years or so. This B Corp movement has been growing. There's another New Hampshire business here. Dan from Revision Energy in the back there is another B Corp.
Okay.
And At first, we decided not to, when we first learned about it, we decided not to go there, just because what I said, we were already certified in all these other ways, so we didn't necessarily feel we needed another certification. But then as we saw this movement grow, what we saw is that these were businesses that were really out to show the world that there is good ways of doing business, that you can make a profit and do good, and that was a real connection for us that we wanted to be part of. So last year we went through the process to become certified, and in December 2016 we officially became a B Corp. And so this is growing. There's growing awareness amongst consumers about B Corps. If there on the cups of yogurt we have it's a little B with a circle around it. That's the logo. And but there's really a movement of people and companies and energy behind it that are really looking to do good in the world, and it's exciting. It's an exciting piece of the puzzle right now.
It's worldwide. There's about 2,000 or even more companies that are in Latin America and in Europe being certified. So in a way, at least kind of from the research perspective, because that's what I do, yes, there's a correlation, in a way, a positive correlation between this self-regulating mechanisms, if you will, and the willingness of consumers to positively think about the company. So now I turn it to you about GREs, in essence, something similar, different.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar, there's a set of indicators called the Global Reporting Initiative that was actually started by Ceres, a Boston-based NGO, Coalition for Environmentally Responsible Economies, probably 15 or so years ago. And what was happening is that there was this proliferation of environmental reporting and sustainability reporting that was out there, not on just the environment, but also social impacts. And there wasn't any standards by which to sort of measure those impacts. And so the Global Reporting Initiative set out initially to really start to try and develop metrics and parameters around those impact areas, so that if you were comparing a report from one company that was reporting under the Global Reporting Initiative to another, then you could do a compare and contrast, right? What's interesting, how many of you are familiar with FASB, Financial Accounting Standards Board, right? So there's a movement here, again, it's voluntary, but there's a Sustainable Accounting Standards Board that's starting to gain momentum to make sure that the kind of reporting that gets done, not only environmental and social reports, but now that are becoming incorporated into financial results, okay, again, have a set of standards and a rigor, okay, that probably hadn't existed before, so that investors and others can make, sort of comparative analysis on relative performance of one company versus another company. So I think all of those are really good because, again, I think we all struggled for a while trying to figure out, under what, either what metrics or what language we should use as we were reporting. And in the early days, there were some folks out there that reported things that probably weren't credible and probably smacked a bit of greenwashing. And so what we've tried to do is to use the Global Reporting Initiative as sort of our baseline to report on the impact areas that are most material to our business. And so for the last 14 years, we've been listed on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index as a result of that from our reporting. So we get compared to other corporations. And there have been large corporations that have been delisted off of that index. So we feel very proud of that accomplishment. Unfortunately, because we're now owned by a private equity firm as of September, we can no longer be listed on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So this will be the last year that we'll be listed. But we'll still report and we'll still be transparent moving forward using those indices, yeah.
All right, well, thank you. Those were my questions, so I would like to open it up now for the audience. I think we have a microphone, and so we'll get to you.
Thank you. This is for Mark Buckley. I'm curious about your procurement policies. How do you take measures to monitor the conditions under which the products you acquire all over the world are produced in an ethical manner? You mentioned paper in particular, but
Sure.
There are a lot of other products that your company sells.
Sure. So we, the bulk of our we hope that the majority of our business will actually be products that are under our own brand label. We don't have manufacturing operations. We contract manufacture products, but obviously that presents a unique opportunity for us to set specifications and standards by which those products are made. We contract with a third party, Bureau Veritas, to go out and actually do environmental and social audits on our suppliers to make sure that they're in compliance. Where we find that they're not in compliance, it's not that we initially cut them off. We have a whole set of steps that we proactively take to try and engage the supplier to move them up the continuum. And I think that's the thing that's interesting about understanding where your sphere of influence is beyond the four walls of your operations. If we walk away from the table, somebody else is going to take that business and not care. What we want to do is have a seat at the table and engage those suppliers and get them to improve that performance. Obviously, at some point in time, all policies, can't be a paper tiger, no pun intended, but you have to take that policy and it has to have teeth in it. So there have been many times where we've taken and dropped suppliers as a result of non-compliance from either social or environmental issues. So hopefully that answers your question.
I will go over there first and then with you, Michelle.
Good morning. I have a couple, well, I'll one at a time. I'm curious, Mark, you talked about the initial picketing that got your company moving in that direction. I'm wondering, were other companies in the same business affected just the same? Had they been the first movers and you were under pressure to follow what they were doing? Or did the picketing then move on to the next company? Are people willing to pay more to have these kinds of measures put in place, or are they going to always be moving to the lowest price provider?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We could spend a whole day on that, but the short answer is the way that most environmental campaigns work is they try and pick sort of an industry leader, they try and activate that, and they sort of move down the continuum and figure out who else that they can engage. Our philosophy has been to have once the campaign was over, we basically sat down with the NGOs and we brought them in and actually had them meet with our buyers so that they understood some of the realities that our buyers face and some of the challenges they had around things like where are you going to get certified products where there is no certified fiber and there's no land that's certified today. The whole pricing issue. I mean, so what we want to try and do is use our position in the marketplace to reset the new normal. So the whole idea is if we can create a new normal where people aren't forced to make a choice between price and performance or price and environmental or social compliance, that's really where we want to move. And I think that that's important. We also know that that takes investment on the front end for us. And so for many years we've been working through a number of collaboratives to try and get the markets to move. I get asked many times, well, what do you think about a competitor that has come out with a very positive position on a particular part of their supply chain? Are you worried that they followed you? And it's like, no, I think that's great. I mean, the more of those kinds of customers that are actually putting pressure on the marketplace to fundamentally shift the dynamic accelerates that. And so Lisa and I both know that you work in these pre-competitive kinds of situations where we fundamentally want to shift the way that the market works. And we work with competitors all the time to do that. But what we've tried to do is to have that open and honest dialogue with all parties. So I mean, I talk to everybody from Greenpeace to the most conservative supplier and sort of everybody in between, and always will. Now we won't always agree, and we won't always agree at the speed by which we can move things. But it's important to really understand that collective point of view, and then to figure out like how can we use our position in the marketplace to move things forward faster. So hopefully that answers your question.
And can I just ask a question to Lisa that's, I think Mark just touched on it. More and more companies are now selling organic yogurt and hormone-free, and how does that affect your your distinction as that leader in that area? Is Stonyfield under pressure as other firms copy what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very competitive marketplace, and so I think that this is one of the times when we really call on our history, and that consumers who have been aware of us for many years know that this is who we've always been. This is how we've always done our business, and so through being transparent, like Mark talked about, you could go to our website and you can see where we buy all sorts of our ingredients. Really transparent about the supply chain and the farmers with whom we partner. And so I think shoppers have to make really quick decisions. You want to get in the grocery store, you want to get out, you want to get home. And so the moment at the shelf is not a great time to try to engage a consumer. You need to have the beautiful package there ready to go that they want to go. But what really helps in getting them to pick the Stonyfield off the shelf is in the knowledge and the comfort that this is a company I trust. And so trying to stay continually authentic and transparent, and to keep that trust with consumers is really key. And it's hard. It's a competitive marketplace, and there's all kinds of messaging that is confusing to consumers. The number of consumers that actually understand what certified organic means, that alone is a challenge, not to mention all the other things that we do behind the scenes that are even deeper and harder to take more time to explain. So it's definitely a challenging marketplace, and we continue to innovate and do the best we can to get our message out there and to keep those consumers coming back.
I just one comment that I checked their website, and it's very, as you mentioned, there's so many, what is organic, what is certified, and they have a nice quiz that you can take. So for the consumers, to educate consumers about all these various, certifications that really, you may be misled, right? Other companies use natural. What does natural mean versus organic, and how misleading that is. We had, I think, Michelle here. Another question?
Thank you. Mark, first, I think it would be great, since we're at the Institute of Politics, if you could possibly go to DC and moderate discussion down there. But
I'm way out of my league there, trust me.
Anyway, I'm wondering, you mentioned sustainability is a journey and not a destination, so I'm wondering where both companies are going. What's your next big thing in your sustainability initiatives?
Want to go, or do you want me to go?
You
Okay,
can go.
I'll go. Okay, so I think Lisa actually hit on it a little bit, and she talked about the fact that Stonyfield has had these values ingrained and been authentic since day one. I think that that's really important. So what Stonyfield has done is they've basically been licensed to serve a customer based on trust that they've built, and I think they use their position in the marketplace now to start to educate that consumer, right? And so for us, the bulk of our business right now is with businesses, and businesses are trying to struggle to figure out, like, how do they become more sustainable, and what better way to be sustainable than with the products that they use each and every day. So we have an opportunity, we think, to actually create sustainability literacy, within our customer base that is actually very impactful. So if one of our sales folks is sitting across the table for a large company, a bank or a financial institution where they have 250,000 end users, and we are able to convince them to put a particular sustainable paper, for example, as a core list on their website that customers order, we fundamentally shift the market dynamics, immediately, as opposed to waiting to try and convince every customer that walks in the store to buy this versus that. And so I think the hope for us is that we continue to increase sustainability literacy, within our customer base, and then also create that market demand that isn't allowing us to make the price as competitive in some cases as it needs to be in order to get volume through the pipeline. So that's one thing. The other thing that we're doing is we're really looking at our position in the marketplace to create new business models. Things like the circular economy, for example. I mean, we have a whole program today where we we basically remanufacture old cubicle systems. There's about $60 or $70 billion worth of cubicle systems, high cubicle systems that nobody wants anymore, and most of them are throwing them away. We have a partner that basically takes those, they cut them down, they re-index them, they take all the old VOCs and paints and finishes that are bad for the environment, all the flame retardants, and they actually put those products back into service at a price that's less than new, and it meets a BIFMA standard for level, which meets a green building standard. And the thought process for us is, we have, again, I'm a biologist, so I think about things from a systems standpoint. We have all these installers out there that install furniture systems. We have designers that design the built environment, Well, what if we fundamentally change the way that people work? So we're working on a program right now where we're looking at things like, gee, could we actually create workspace as a service so you don't have to own your furniture? And what if we were the ones that installed it? And by the way, when you move out, we deinstall it and we put it back into service at a fraction of the cost, at a fraction of the environmental footprint that bringing in new would be. So it's a fundamental change in the way that we're thinking. But we don't do this alone. I mean, we have a partnership with the Rochester Institute of Technology. We've been funding a lab up there for sustainable innovation, looking at these kinds of models, and then kind of looking at the position that we have in the marketplace. We have a logistical infrastructure that moves materials out to customers every day, and those trucks come back almost empty every night. So what can we do to use that reverse logistics capability to move materials effectively and get them back into service? So it really requires us thinking differently about our position in the marketplace. But we think that if we can make people work more efficiently and more productively at less of a cost, and then layer on the sustainable benefit on top of it, who else does that? Nobody. We think we can do it. So that's, I think, what we're working on. We're kind of excited about it.
So, for us, I think job number one is just continue to grow organic. And, by continuing to grow organic, we're supporting more family farmers and more acres of organic and less chemicals in the environment and less GMOs. And just continuing to grow helps increase our benefit in the world. And so I think that's job number one for sure. And educating the consumer and working with customers is, all part of that to make that happen. And then I think, I don't know if I'll call it job number two, but the other thing, really keen on our minds is around climate change and what our role is in addressing climate change. Because, we, as being close to our supply chain, being an agriculturally based company, our supply chain feels that climate change is already happening, and it's just going to continue to get worse in terms of extreme weather events and whatnot. Droughts and floods and recovering from that is really hard on the agricultural sector, and so it influences our sourcing and our costs, and so this is a real business imperative for us. So to continue to work on many fronts, that is in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is one piece of that. Continuing to work and think about resiliency in our business and in our supply chain is an important piece of that. Using our voice to get engaged in discussions around where we're going, and on the federal level and on the state level, we're engaged in conversations about how do we move forward for clean energy, and then back to the supply chain for a second. One of the really important things around climate change too is that we, as in organic farming practices, you can sequester carbon in the soil. So really working with partners to gain more advantage out of that in terms of farmers having information and knowledge about their soils, about their practices, and how they can gain from this. And then also, how do we create financial markets around it so that a farmer can sequester carbon in the soil and actually find an economic opportunity from it? So there's a lot of big conversations going on around that right now, around how agriculture can play a part in solving climate change. And so that's really exciting too.
Yes, please. Another question.
Thank you both for being here. It's been a wonderful conversation, Mark, especially as a successful alumnus. Welcome back to campus. But Lisa, I wanted to act with the, you referred to this a little bit with the French connection or the European connection with Stonyfield now 15 years or so. How do you see or can you talk a little bit about the ethical and governance expectations of European countries and their corporations, and if that's affected, I can't imagine it hasn't, how that contrasts and then how it's affected you in governance and ethics here in the US in relationship to government entities.
Yeah, so both of the parent companies that we've had are global companies, so they're working in different contexts all around the world, and so I think for me the bigger difference really is sort of the public company and the requirements they face around public reporting and whatnot versus the private company. Being really self-driven and these voluntary mechanisms being more important. And so I think that it's important for us to stay mindful that we have global impacts, even though being a New Hampshire-based company and having a supply chain primarily in the U.S., but we have responsibilities around the world as well. And so, a lot of our reporting that we've done has been more consolidated underneath the corporate governance structure. So Stonyfield has been transparent in our own ways with websites and sharing information about our supply chain with our consumers and whatnot. But in terms of reporting and GRI and things like that, that has been through the parent company and under this global context. And so it's all it all sort of works together to provide the governance that we need to do well.
In terms of, I'd like to follow up on your question with governance. Do you feel that these European companies like Danone or Lactalis maybe are subjected to more regulations, and then in Europe or the EU, and then would they tend to mirror that here even if they're not required to follow those regulations?
Yeah, I think that's true. To some extent, that there's some expectations that we had that weren't driven by U.S. regulations, but they really. So there's a mix of sort of a certain level of uniformity across the globe of how they govern, but recognition of local conditions and local expectations.
There's room for that then. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi. I wonder if you have any benchmarks or even anecdotes about accomplishments in your sustainability efforts, and that might be told from the perspective of a farmer who's increased his yield, or her yield, or maybe in the benchmark category, you bought X amount of paper that was sustainable as opposed to the previous year, that sort of thing.
Well, I guess a couple things come to mind. One about yields. There was we buy organic sugar from Brazil, and there was a company there that was growing conventional sugar, and made quite a big transformation to organic, and absolutely saw yields increase and saw birds come back to their fields. They saw like a huge difference in the quality of the soil, in the biodiversity on their land, as well as greater yield. So that in particular was a really great story. And similarly, we source bananas from Costa Rica, and so most bananas, if you notice, you go to the grocery store, there's only one type of banana. No matter what store you go in, all around the country, there's one type of banana. Well, do you think there's really only one variety of banana in the world? There's, like any other, fruit or vegetable, there's all kinds, but now they're heirloom, right? So we actually buy. So banana plantations. A lot of chemical use, a lot of exposure, potentially for employees and neighbors to be exposed to chemicals. So we're sourcing bananas from a little cooperative in Costa Rica. It's actually primarily cocoa cooperative, and they essentially grow bananas in a jungle almost, where they have cocoa, they have bananas, they have other fruits and whatnot that really balance, create a greater dynamic without the need for all those chemicals and whatnot. And really, the cocoa yields 2 crops a year, whereas bananas, they can grow all year long, so it helps with some sustainability across their year. And so, you know, those kinds of impacts that we can have in the supply chain by not by just going out and just buying commodity bananas, but really cultivating a relationship with a grower can really make a difference. And in this case, you know, the banana cooperative was reliant on the large banana growers in their region to do processing, and so we've worked with Danone to provide funding to them to invest in their own processing facility so that they can have control closer to their areas of growth and to take a greater piece of their economic value from their product. And so those are the kinds of stories that, you know, that we feel really good about, that it's a different way of doing business.
I like that story. I didn't talk to Lisa before, but I grew up in Costa Rica. So I was going to say, yes, there were different kinds of bananas when I grew up, many. And now there's one, the Chiquita, right?
Exactly.
Mostly in the supermarket.
Yeah.
So, sorry, the same question. I think you intended it for
Yeah,
both,
I mean, so for us, I think, you know, we have very similar kinds of stories, I think, as we look at supply chain. And as you can imagine, the amount of paper that we sell, you know, in the wood-based products, I mean, forests are a huge, you know, component of our supply chain in terms of raw material that we use. So a couple of things we try to think about is to try and think about, well, how can we shift that demand potentially to other types of fiber? So we have a whole line of products, for example, today that are made out of bagasse, so sugarcane waste, you know, that used to get a byproduct from the sugar industry. It used to get burned in the fields, you know. So you think about paper, and I term it paper with a purpose. You know, you have a utilitarian purpose. You want to convey an idea. You want it to be bright. You want it to have a certain weight. You want it to do all the things you want paper to do. But how it's made and where it's made can fundamentally make a difference, right? So we buy a lot of paper from a mill in Argentina, where again, historically that fiber would have been, you know, I've been to the mill, and you know, they basically, you know, they cut the sugar cane into lengths of about this long. They squeeze all the juice out of it to make either alcohol, or sugar, depending on the market. And then the fiber is usually trucked out in the fields and burned in the fields openly. So you create a localized air pollution problem, right? So now what we do is we actually use that fiber as a fiber source instead of using tree fiber. So half a world away now, there's a farmer now that's getting an economic benefit because they're getting paid for fiber that would have been burned in the fields. We mitigate a localized air pollution problem in a community half a world away. The energy required to run the paper mill comes from the bagasse, the sugarcane waste, so it's actually viewed as carbon neutral, although I'd argue about that anyway. But at the end of the day, you know, it's just paper, right? But how it's made and where it's made can make all the difference in the world. One other quick anecdote about forests in the South. Most people think that, you know, these paper products that we buy in the United States come from these large industrial landowner bases. Well, those are gone. They don't exist anymore. They're either large timber management organizations on them called TIMOs, or in most cases in the Southeast, it's all small private landowners that own under 200 acres. So for us, the big challenge is we want certified fiber, yet we can't find a certified source because many of the landowners don't want to get, or don't know how to get their land certified. So back in 2007, one of those environmental groups that was picketing us, Dogwood Alliance and Staples, got together and we created a collaborative called the Carbon Canopy to see if we could actually encourage landowners to put their land into certified land management, where they do things like staggered harvest rotations. They have a land use plan that's very detailed around the biological values on the land, but the idea there was much to the way that Lisa's thinking about, you know, low-till or no-till kinds of agriculture, is that we're sequestering carbon in these areas, and we're creating another revenue stream for landowners, as opposed to you need to cut all of the timber off of your land, okay, which might be a once in a generation activity to maximize the board feet of lumber that you get. Now what we're doing is we're saying you've got other options. We can strategically harvest trees, but we can also keep some of them in conservation, and we can keep some of them in carbon sequestration, and we can actually pay you for those benefits. And so we've actually had a successful project, a number of successful projects in the Southeast, where we've been engaging directly with, again, small private landowners, which 15 or 20 years ago we never would have done.
I think I just want to mention that in the interest of time, I think
Sure.
we still have, okay, one more question.
Thank you very much. I have one question, and that is to both of you. How do you think your workforce would respond to your comments today? And how do you think your workforce feels about the way in which they feels about the company, both of your companies, and working for a quote-unquote ethical company? Do they experience that? How do they experience that? In very concrete ways. What would they say? If we had a subgroup over here commenting on the side, what do you think they would say about what you're saying? Thank you.
So we have about 350 employees, all based here in New Hampshire and Londonderry. They come from all walks of life, representing, the population in New Hampshire. And so, some companies, really screen new employees for looking for mission alignment. We never really did. We're hiring the best available candidates, and they may come in, they may have been drawn to Stonyfield because of who we are, because of our dynamic leader. There's a number of us who saw Gary Hirschberg speak at an event. Personally, I saw him first speak when I lived in Michigan, and I ended up working here for him a number of years later. And that's not terribly uncommon in the company either. But then there's many that come in, it's just a job, and it happens to be close to home or whatnot, and they didn't come because Stonyfield is a values-led company. But at the end of the day, almost everyone across the board really gives feedback that knowing that they're coming and contributing to something, that we're delivering a healthy, nutritious product out into the world, and that we're doing it in a way that makes a difference in the world, that really is reinforcing for people that it's more than a job, that it's something that they can come and feel good about, that they're really contributing to something that matters, and that they can take that home and they can share that with their families and their friends, and that has value for them. And so I think becoming a B Corp last year reinforced that. And as we continue to grow, and we can now we've gone through this ownership transition. It's nice to have this benefit corporation certification, and we have to actually, through acquisition, have to recertify now. To show that we're going to continue to be that company, and that yes, we have pressures around sales and around profits and about delivery and meeting capacity and all those things day in and day out that can create stressors in the business and create pressure for people. But having it backed by making a difference in the world really helps people feel good about coming to work each day.
Thank you.
I would say for us, it's probably a little bit different. We're a larger company in terms of geographic, number of locations, and then the types of operations. So we have about 45,000 associates, and stores and distribution centers and call centers and offices, and a variety of different areas of the business. I would say in the facilities where you've got a plaque on the wall that says one of the 750 stores or distribution centers or buildings that are Energy Star certified, that operate at 25% of the building class for energy efficiency. They probably are aware of, or the 45 solar installations that we have across the country, they probably are a little bit more aware. I think that the big opportunity for us is still probably unmet, and that is really creating a culture of continuous communication that starts to do an effective job of storytelling about what we're doing and why we're doing it. 15 years ago, I probably would have had a very different view on what my priorities were. I would have gotten all wonked out on the metrics and talked a little bit about the science. And not that that's not important, but we have 45,000 people, and I have to move 45,000 people 1 or 2 degrees off of center today to think a little bit differently about the work that they do every day. And if you can do that, and you can also empower them to take their good ideas and bubble them up, and then use them as examples of champions that actually have made a difference. Because, you know, I'm a sustainability guy. I should be excited about this, right? I mean, if I'm not, I'm in the wrong job, right? But for people, somebody that's on a line at a distribution center or somebody that's in a retail store, you know, for them to work for a large organization and feel that there's an opportunity for them to have their the things they care about most, you know, acted upon, is very empowering, and it creates a very different culture. We're not there yet, but the times that we've been able to effectively tell those stories and engage those associates, we see the power in it. So I would say that we still have a long way to go, to answer your question. So I would say if you put these people in the room, I would say there are going to be pockets of folks that get all of it, and there are other folks that don't get anywhere near as much of it. So we have a long way to go with those folks, to be honest.
Yeah, and so it's obviously a very different thing of the network of employees that you have, you know, all around the globe versus, you know, we have all of our folks based in New Hampshire and can touch them on a daily basis. But, you know, the other thing is if they were sitting around the table here, you know, at a minimum, you know, they'll say, you know, I'm paid fairly, or hopefully they're saying I'm paid well. I have 5 weeks vacation. I'm taking a maternity or a paternity leave and getting paid for 3 months. You know, there's benefits and workplace practices that they know are better than industry average, and that you know, that's what's in it for me. Regardless of how they feel about everything else that the company does, that, you know, our benefits and our workplace practices are obviously the thing that they probably would call to first, many of them. So that's definitely an important piece.
I think there's probably a lot more to talk about, but again, in the interest of time, in your time, I think we'll stop here. If you want to stay, I think you can stay a little bit longer, but I want to thank you for being here today, and of course, especially I want to thank Lisa and Mark for being here, and so round of applause to them. Thank you.